Hi, everyone, and thank you, Nava, for the wonderful introduction. My name's Ann Hiatt. I'm the founding director of Opera on Tap, and the reason why we're here is that my company has been exploring projects that integrate XR into opera projects, not only on the artistic side, but also in terms of creating back-end solutions. So I'm really excited to have all of these panelists with me that really kind of represent a variety of places where artists are in the performing arts world are integrating with XR. And I want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So at first, let's start with Camille.
Sure. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Anne. So my name's Camille Donegan. I'm an XR producer based in Dublin, Ireland. And my background is that I had parallel careers in the arts and in tech. So I wanted to be an actor. My dad said, no way. Get a proper job and then we'll think about it. So I studied computer science because I liked computer games. And while I was writing really boring banking software at night and on all my holidays, I was an actor and a theatre maker. So I did that for 15 years, you know, banker by day and performer by night. And then 5 years ago, I discovered virtual reality. And it was a complete eureka moment for me. It was an art installation by a Danish creator called Mads Dambo, and it was an embodied experience. And I could feel what this character was feeling. And that was it for me. I left my job and I spent a few years running around the country with a camera on my head, trying to create stories and see where I fit in this medium. Luckily enough, the arts came back full circle, and for the last 2 years I've been working closely with the performing arts organisations in Ireland and supporting them and empowering artists to have the skills and the knowledge that they need to embrace these technologies. And through some of that work, I got connected with Irish National Opera, and we are now part of an European 3-year project that's all about social transformation using co-creation, and so working with communities to create opera. And VR is at the heart of the co-creation process with the communities. And also in year 3, we will be making a best-in-class virtual reality opera, and hopefully in 2022 it'll be at AWE and South by Southwest and all these great places.
That's great. All right, let's see. How about Kamala? How about you next?
Hi, I'm Kamala Sankaram. I'm a composer, and I also had sort of a double life that led up to my working in the intersection of technology and the performing arts. I actually have a PhD in cognitive psychology, and my research was on how the internet changes interactions between people. And at the same time, I was a professional singer and studied composition as an undergrad. So as my music career began to take off, I was looking for ways to keep integrating my research, even though I wasn't researching anymore, into the things that I was making for the theater. And so a lot of my projects have been about how do you combine these very new technologies with a very, very old art form. And I think that there's a misconception there, because opera has actually often throughout history been at the forefront of adapting new technologies such as the orchestra itself, acoustically designed concert halls, and so on and so forth. So it makes a very perfect fit in a lot of ways, particularly because virtual reality, augmented reality, binaural audio, ambisonic audio are all better at capturing what it is to actually hear a live opera singer than a flat 2D recording. So many of my projects have been exploring what are the possibilities of this new technology. Working with Annie and Jerre, we created the Parksville Murders, which is a virtual reality opera. I had a recent piece which worked with technologists at Carnegie Mellon to create a piece about surveillance, capitalism, and privacy, where we live data mined the audience and put their information into the show. And recently I made an opera that was performed live over Zoom using an aleatoric score, which means some chance elements involved, to deal with the latency and the inherent ambiguity there. So I am very excited to be here and have this conversation with all of these really great people. And thank you, Anne.
Absolutely. And Jerre, I went out of alphabetical order. I just realized. So how about you
That's
next?
Fine. Hey, my name is Jerre Dye. I'm an artist, and that I guess encompasses a lot of things, including playwriting, writing for opera, directing, acting, designing. I'm pretty well-rounded in theatrical form because, frankly, I like to see how the vegan sausages get made. You know, I have a love for the moving parts. In particular, I love collaboration. It's something that frankly I get to do a whole lot less of when I'm behind the writing table. I often tell folks that I only write to get into the room. I should also say that I grew up around film production, so I have, of course, a love of all things cinema. My first experience with VR was several years ago on this project that Kamala just mentioned, with Kamala and Opera on Tap and all those folks. And when that project began, my first question was, what the hell is VR? So I was new in many, many ways. And then the second question, of course, is what the hell does a VR screen paint even look like? And of course, in the beginning, some years ago, there were not a lot of handy examples floating around the internet. So I decided to do what we all do, which is choosing north, south, east, west instead of quadrants. I have since learned the error of my ways. But I really loved the process, and I continue to love the form, but basically because of the way tech explores the idea of embodiment and agency and action, which is, of course, what writing is really all about. In our initial VR piece that Kamala was just mentioning, we were exploring two modes. First person, seeing through the eyes of the observer, and then also third person, this disembodied I. And our goal with the project was to create mystery and tension between these two things, inviting the participants to constantly ask the question, who am I as a witness? And also, what agency do I actually have in the world? I'm a visual writer. That means I actually have to see the thing in my head for it to actually take shape. So the VR collaboration demanded that I define all the ideas that I have in my head as clearly and thoroughly as possible, which frankly was like being like a kid in a candy store. And it gave me permission, permission that frankly a lot of other forms were not able to do, mostly because the jobs in theater are so siloed. But this was a chance for me to not only get out what was in my head, but also engage in this kind of deeper collaborative process with all the people at the table. The communal exploration of the backstory and the dramaturgy was really unparalleled. So I'm happy to be here today for a deeper discussion about the visual, the sonic, and the narrative language that happens inside the tech.
Thanks, Jerre. And Shahrokhk, how about you?
Hi, very happy to be here and among this really fantastic group. It's a bit of a mantra. I also come from the world of technology and arts. Similar to Camille, at first I wanted to study music, but said, no, I got to get a real job. So I ended up to be an electrical engineer and programmer for many years, did that. But then I switched to music. And through music, I actually started a sort of an interdisciplinary path that I ended up on theater for so many years. But all of this was weaved through with the use of technology. And in general, now I work on technology in the interest of some content, some specific content. My foray into XR was really through spatialization. I use spatialization in most of my pieces. And in terms of spatialization, I'm always interested in creating an environment. The interaction between the content and context has always been important to me in the modern language of the art. What is content and context is not quite clear, but in VR, we are faced with something new, which was very exciting for me, and that is the role of sound. Is that we used to have the proscenium in front of us telling us, the lights would tell us exactly where we need to look at. And it's a very exact relationship with the content. But sound allows us to be very abstract. Sound allows us to be, sound has always been the proscenium of emotion. But I feel like in VR, we're able to go into the abstract world a lot more and still have the narrative common with it. So that's been my interest. I run a couple of groups at Qualcomm Institute at UC San Diego, the Sonic Arts Research and Development, where we do a lot of work on acoustic modeling and spatializations, but again, in the interest of providing really content that pushes the technology. You know, there's also an IDEAS program, the Initiative for Digital Exploration of Arts and Sciences, which is a program for fostering and presenting technological experimental art that actually supports a lot of connection, interdisciplinary connection within UC San Diego.
Thank you. And Victoria?
Yes, I've been enjoying listening to everybody. This is great. So my name is Victoria Robertson, and I actually studied visual arts and music at UC San Diego, and kind of dove straight into the world of music, started singing with San Diego Opera when I was 18 years old in the chorus. And I sort of really had a very quick education about the world of grand opera, being at the time one of the top 8 houses, working with a lot of international celebrities coming in to do solo parts. So singing with them for 12 years really taught me a lot about that industry at the highest level. But I went to start training to become a soloist more seriously, and to pay my way through that vocal training, I started to produce television shows with a network called AWE, which is actually stands for A Wealth of Entertainment. And I did luxury travel shows across the world where I wrote, produced, and presented. So that was very successful. I started diving into technology pretty early because that was when 3D televisions were a thing, and they thought that this would really take off. So immediately they started handing me 3D cameras and saying, start making content in 3D, which took a different way of thinking. You know, you had to really work through the technology, making sure that you're not having too much of the cross vision and double images. So I started surrounding myself with some good tech people who understood that technical side of these productions, and got a little bit interested in that. When the television careers that I was working with, the production company sort of started closing its doors to in-house production, I started looking for other avenues, and that was just about 2014 when VR, the first Oculus glasses, started coming out as prototypes, and a friend of mine sort of stuck one on my face, and I immediately thought, it was the Cirque du Soleil one, which was so exciting at the very beginning. And I immediately thought, oh, since I do travel TV, I thought this is the future of travel, because, you know, immediately you can be in a location. Let's just go for it. So we had a pretty great team of, I would say, special effects artists in Hollywood that we were connected with. So I just stuck up a website. We were one of the first virtual reality companies to have a website. And so within 2 weeks, I got contacted by Cathay Pacific Airlines saying, you know, can you do X, Y, and Z? And I kept calling my tech team saying, can we do X, Y, and Z? Yes, we can. Can we do this? Yes, we can. So we sort of really threw ourselves into it when the technology was just getting started, before all the stitching software was out. And so I did a great, successful job with the airline, and we started doing more travel industry things for hotels, etc. And then that's also when I decided to try and see what the one-person game would be, because the individual cost-effective cameras hadn't yet come out, or they were just starting to come out in the market. So I started working with Kodak and their little double fisheye lens camera, and I started running around doing a lot of work for tourism agencies like Swiss Tourism and Iceland, and just sort of doing more presenter-based entertainment type shows in 360 and VR. So I really dove into it early, and then I started realizing that the funding wasn't quite there yet for entertainment in VR. It was getting more heavy towards medical and other types of you know, necessary needs for VR. So I took a break from that and went back to music and theater until Opera Hack, which we'll talk about more, brought everyone who has the arts and technology background together in a hackathon in San Diego with San Diego Opera. And that was really fun, because I got to explore a lot of these ideas that I had already been mulling over, and teaming up with great people like Anne and another partner of ours with Houston Grand Opera, and starting to think, my main objective was, now how can we use this technology to help the theater save money? How can we actually do something, not just entertainment, because from experience, I realized there's not always money. Money's harder to find when you're just doing entertainment. But if we can actually invent something, create something that's going to save the company's money, then maybe we can actually kind of make a big difference, and it would be worth investing in for them. So that's where we are now, developing that startup, which I'm sure we can talk a little bit more about later.
Yeah, thank you. And we have about, I think, about 13 minutes for discussion. So we're going to keep tightly framed around three topics here. The first one being, how will performing arts industry professionals with their specific skill sets experience contribute to the development of the XR space? And that's from a creative perspective. So maybe leading off with Kamala and Jerre and Shahrokhk on, and then Camille on that one. And
Sure. I think that it's interesting because I think people in the live performing arts are actually very uniquely ready to deal with XR experiences, simply because we deal in 3 dimensions all the time, especially those of us that are making immersive pieces. So I think, when you're learning film editing and film techniques, you're thinking about controlling where the viewer is looking in your editing process, but you can't do that in XR experiences. And so I think there's a real opportunity to bring people from the theater world into narrative VR, narrative AR, and because they can think of things in this 3-dimensional way that you're not necessarily going to find from people who are used to dealing with the flat 2D experience. And I think that that's true for the sound also. In that one of the things that I find interesting about XR is, where is the sound coming from, right? Because we don't always think about that. And that's another way, as Shahrokhk was saying, is this how you place yourself into the experience very directly. And about, if you're going to score your experience, where is the music coming from? Like, is it a disembodied orchestra floating above your head? Or are you actually seeing the musicians? And so there are all of these decisions that have to be made in that moment that you don't necessarily make when you're dealing with the 2D film.
Yeah. How about you, Jerre?
Yeah, I have to say, mostly it's just like it's joyful. Advocating for the joy and the collaboration. As I was saying earlier, while writing these kinds of pieces, one of the things that I was discovering is getting it all out on the paper was a necessary evil, but then also getting into the room and solving problems together ended up becoming one of the most exciting things. Solving the problems of the eye, solving the problems of understanding how even staging behaves in this world, doing continuous shots, For me, it was like spelunking. You know what I mean? There was so much unknown, and then getting in the room with the collaborators to solve the problem together. As I was saying earlier, there's a tendency in theater, for instance, for everything to be siloed and everyone to live in their own little bubbles and little worlds. But under the circumstances, we couldn't exist in that way. So in a lot of ways, it forced us to innovate and kind of blow up the process in a way, which for me is essential.
Yeah, what is it you love to say about theater is that you love a boundary or a restriction, and I think we kept running into those.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the thing that you have to push against is the solution. Often, right? If you're pushing too hard, chances are you don't need to be pushing at all. Sometimes, go around, go over is definitely what it was like, to work on the VR project that we worked on, and also integrating in our project that, like many of you during the pandemic, thwarted our efforts in doing our next leg of the project, which was we had the VR piece, and then we moved on to do a live production, kind of a roving live interactive production with audience members in the facility at Seattle Opera. And so then exploring, then the circles, the concentric circles got bigger and bigger because we got to ladle in notions of sound and how does, like Kamala was saying, how does sound affect the overall narrative? In fact, the obstacle ended up being the solution, right? Sound ended up being the primary narrative force. So the technology informing the actual narrative structure is joyful, and I think artists, as a rule, we're trained to be problem solvers. Because if we don't, we do not survive.
And Camille, you've been also working in sorry,
I was just going to say something really quick to Kamala's comment is that like you, as artists, we can envision what's going to draw people's attention, because think that can be like the lighting situation, that can be the sound situation, that can be action situation. And when you are looking at a theater stage, that's exactly what you have to do. You have to use all these components to try and attract people to the narrative that you want them to see, but also make allowance for the fact that some people aren't going to be looking at that. So you have to keep a narrative going in other areas as well. And I think that the biggest collaboration between artists and technicians is to make sure that they don't just go for the artistic vision and abandon the technical side of it, because the technology will distract if it's not high quality, or if it's not, you know, it's one thing to have an artistic vision, it's another thing to make sure that that's of the highest quality.
And I think that that's an important point to bring up, because, you know, like for us, we talk about dramaturgy. You know, why are we using this technology in this moment, and how does it serve this storytelling? In the early days of video, you would often see people throw a video behind a proscenium performance to take the place of a set that they didn't want to build. So that's not using it very well. But I mean, I think that that's where collaboration between those who are in the technology world and those who are in the arts world is really essential, because you as the technologists know what the technology is capable of, and that informs the creation of the piece in a way that's really, really important to make it an integrated whole rather than something that's slapped on at the end.
It is great as well to have artists who are completely naive to what's possible. So when artists ask me, well, can you do that? Or can you do that yet? I'm like, don't worry about that. Just tell me more about the vision, tell me more about the story, and we'll figure out the possibilities, because there's many different ways to skin a cat, right? So you can go down, you know, the Unity route and you have interactive, animated and computer generated worlds, or maybe you're doing volumetric capture or mocap or working with ambisonics. And do you have interactivity? Maybe it's better, it's passive. It depends on the story. So keeping those questions at the door, is this possible yet? And just keeping it out of the room.
And I think it's really cool also because, you know, sometimes like my experience has often been that I will want something that doesn't exist. And so then I'll go and I will talk to as many people as possible until I find the person that will want to build it. Like the data mining strategy platform that we used for the show that I mentioned, Looking at You, that did not exist. There was also a chorus of singing tablet computers with content from 25 different streams of data synced wirelessly over all of the tablets. That didn't exist either when we started, but we just found somebody who thought it was a cool idea and decided to build it. So I think there's a lot of potential for collaboration between people in the performing arts and in the technology field, because we're all dreaming what the technology can do, and we're just coming at it from different perspectives.
And also having people on board that understand the psychology of it, because once you start putting, especially with VR, you know, once you start putting headsets on people at the very early stages, as you all know, there was experiences that were making people feel very sick, very dizzy, very nauseous, and then they won't put on a headset again. So it's really important to like make sure that those first experiments that you have are also like not only artistic. I guess that's what I was saying, exactly what you said. So like working together is really important.
Yeah. If I can add here, I feel like when we go into VR, we're rebuilding the called virtual reality. We're kind of rebuilding a certain reality, while it is mimicking reality, but we have the position to use the parameters. In music, it's called synthesis, resynthesis. You break it down and you can put it back. So it allows us go into an abstract world. And I really think that abstract world has a direct connection to user design, to UX design. So in many ways, it's the artists and what they can do with it will define how audiences or how the users would interact with the technology. So it reminds me of this, you know, saying with artists, say, well, all else fails, look at the manual. How it was defined and how it was prescribed to use is one thing, but what it allows for the artist to dream on and what would be natural interaction will come out in an artistic piece. And it's not an easy way to do. So in that sense, not only when the artists work with technology companies, they're showcasing their product and showing what they can do, but it also shows where this should go. I think it's the content that will drive where the future of the technology will be. As Victoria said, right now, the issue of quality of XR is extremely important. I'm so sensitive to it. Every time I put it on for a few hours, I have to like do something to mitigate the problems. But I know The new headsets don't have that problem. But I think it's also have to do with the content that is put on. In order for us, how do we interact with it? How comfortably we feel in it? And do we want to go back in it? And
yeah, like
and-
have your full experience, but then keep in mind the limitations so that you're also keeping the same pace as the technology, even though your vision might be bigger, just realizing, like you said, what's available right now that's going to get the best experience. So.
And where our audience is at, because if people haven't tried an interactive experience and they're freaked out by the controllers, or they're an older person, then the passive experience or 360 video might be, you know, meet audiences where they're at in terms of their expectations, and then move from there. So have you tried this? Okay, do that first, then do this.
And then how does that affect the actual, how does the audience relationship with the technology affect the flow of the actual presentation, you know? So the user-friendly notion is really, it's fun to imagine, to build that into the process. Like what is that gonna be for, like you said, an older person?
Yeah. Also, I would follow this saying that it's not just the senses, it's our feelings that defines our relationship. Just this issue of distance. I mean, right now we're dealing with the matter of distance, but what are the technologies that allow us to feel closer to each other? So, you know, visual sense is one thing, but often if you have, for example, quality changes, the sense of distance gets closer. But if you're able to build a narrative that two people feel the same way, they may feel similar to each other. So distance and delay, I feel like, is the fundamental element of where we stand with performing arts and virtual reality.
Yeah.
And the content has to match these ideas, finds ways to mitigate it.
Right, because you're right. We're in the business as artists, and especially theater arts and sound arts, of evoking emotion. So yes, it's about the technology and how that can be our tool, but at the same time, you know, you can watch the simplest pieces, but if they're going to evoke emotion out of you, then that person's going to feel really connected to that piece, and that's what they're going to walk away with. That's what they're going to store in their memory.
Yeah. Well, we have exactly 1 minute left of discussion. I think we could have gone on for an hour and a half for sure. But I did want to touch base very quickly on, since so many performing artists are going to suddenly be entering this space right now, especially given that, you know, theaters are closed, you know, where are the creator tools? And I know Camille had some thoughts on that. So I just wanted to check in with her on what she was thinking.
Yeah, so I'd like you guys to talk about OperaMap as well. So I'll be very quick. So we're exploring creation and co-creation tools that we'll be bringing into the communities, and we want them to build assets, create in tilt brush, create costumes with the mannequin and tilt brush. Everybody's going to create a tag in Kingsbury graffiti, and in the final opera, everybody will be represented with their tag in the lobby of the experience. So we're exploring lots of co-creation tools, and the audio ones, I need more. So we've looked at Lyra VR and Drops.Garden, but I need more VR creation tools. So if you guys have tips on that, because obviously audio needs to be absolutely front and center for this opera co-creation piece with the communities.
If I could jump in, I would just say that that's the one thing that I would urge people who are developing these apps to think more about. And I know Shahrok agrees with me, that often audio is the last thing that you're thinking about, but in the performing arts, and particularly in opera and theater, timing is really, really essential. So the fact that there are still no latency servers that are available really to allow us to have a live streaming experience of VR that adequately captures what it is to hear a live performance of opera or theater. That's something that, until that's fixed, it's not going to be the ideal tool.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
and then Victoria, I don't know if you want to touch on what we're working on.
Sure, with OperaMap, which Annie and I and a couple other partners are working at. So we're it's actually sort of strangely timely, because we're working on capturing volumetrically the theater spaces, and then we have a software that's bringing the virtual assets into that space, such as sets, props, etc., so that they can do a lot of the technical decisions before even entering the theater. And this was originally made as a cost-saving tool, because renting those theaters on a daily basis just to work out tech specs can be very pricey for the opera industry and theater industry. This is also for touring acts that aren't to do with opera. We call it OperaMap, but it's also for touring theatrical productions that need to work out these tech specs ahead of time. But now that we're in COVID, it's just more important as ever to allow them to make all these pre-production planning ahead of time without the travel necessarily right away, and decide which sets are going to work into which spaces and make sure that's all worked out ahead of time. But what we're still interested in working with tech partners is our phase 3, which is working more with the avatar situation. So the last phase of this company, we really want to have people to be able to be in that space together interacting. And I know that the virtual reality shared space avatar programs are developing very fast right now, and there's a lot of new ones on the market, and we're just sort of waiting to see which ones could potentially integrate in with other software to have that full collaboration in that theater space with people all over the world to make these decisions about design, tech, blocking, staging, everything ahead of time, so that the actual time in the theater can be reduced.
And could it also be used for performance? Could you have actors from their bedrooms beaming into avatars and performing live in those
That's
photographs?
my dream. That's my dream. Got to solve that sound latency issue, though. I'm excited to see.
And then we could perhaps have some kind of a cross reality situation where people can watch that on their iPads and kind of move around the stage as they wish. But again, yeah, sound is going to be very important for that, Shahrohk.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I think at this point I have to bring back the track moderator and see if we have any questions from the audience. We have a few minutes left here, and I believe that's all I'm supposed to say. There she is. Hi, Nava.
Hello.
Hi, what a talk. It's some great points.
We could keep
I love
talking.
I know, definitely the latency server type live experience. I can relate to that. All right, so we do have a lot of questions, but we might run out of time. So you can always just jump into the chat and we can go from there. But Pippa Bostock wanted to know, what would you say are the biggest challenges to increasing audience reach in the sector?
For the XR sector?
I think
what she means, or
The arts.
I would say maybe to the arts audience, to your audience.
Well, I think that was sort of one of the thoughts we had with the VR opera, was we were really excited to create a piece that was for that platform, for the virtual reality platform, that also could be distributed to a global audience. So, not limited by the number of seats in the theater. Does anybody else want to touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's been important to all of us to bring the performing arts out of the theater and out of the opera house to some extent, and that that would have the effect of expanding the audience. And on the other side of that, I know when we did our VR opera, we had most of the audience for that had never seen an opera before. So I feel like there's a lot of exchange that can happen to expand audiences for both.
That's amazing, because that's exactly what we're looking at for the European project. And we want to bring these VR and AR areas into rural communities, some of which they don't have bandwidth, so it has to all be local on the devices, but bringing the new technologies to them and letting them experience these novel formats in their own communities.
Yeah, first touch experiences. Yeah.
And the challenge usually just seems to be the technology of the headsets, the mobility of the headsets, and making sure that if someone's there to guide someone through it, that's one thing. Is there another way to just stick the headset on, and as soon as it, has the black light, it can just start playing? So just the same kind of technology boundaries that we all have, I think, is accessibility to viewing the technology seamlessly.
To jump on that point, oh, sorry, Shahrohk.
No problem, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say that, we often forget about the digital divide when we're thinking about all of this also, and how a lot of people they don't have access only to mobile phones. So that's something to keep in mind also, to make sure that the mobile phone experience is just as rich as the experience on the headset.
Right.
One of the challenges that I see is the issue of isolation, which I think XR will solve quite a bit right now. I feel like there's quite a bit of resistance into getting into a VR headset for a very long time because you feel isolated. And then performative elements should be communal. And XR and VR need to get to the place that we are able to connect with each other and actually share a common experience. And so I feel like that's been one of the elements that we have hit. But every time we've had a VR piece, there is a certain limit that people can connect with it. But I'm really hopeful for XR to come in a way into our lives, not just in performative elements, but we start interacting with it in our everyday life, and then the narrative of the contents that are created will become part of our lives. So in some sense, art will be part of our lives in the years to come.
Great. Do we have any other questions we can touch on? I know we're 2 minutes over at this point.
Yeah, we're kind of out. You can check out on the feed, but one question was from Caitlin Kraus. I think she knows you, Victoria. She did a little bit of a shout. She said one question that sprung up for her was thinking about integrated interactions. How much of the integrity do you keep in the storyline of what you might create in an XR theatrical experience? Can the narrative prioritize exactly what you're bringing up right now emotionally and still shift/adapt to recognize the user?
Jerry, do you want to touch on that?
Well, I'm sorry. I think it can. It's just, like this is one of the places where new work can fill the need, right? So it's sometimes hard to retrofit a piece that was not intended to be performed in that way. But if you want to make a new piece, then I don't see that there's any limitation there.
And if you think about VR as part of a toolkit, a transmedia toolkit, story is the thread that binds all of those pieces together. So you have a strong story, you can pop to AR, you can have a second screen experience, you can have a live experience, but the story threads will bind it.
Absolutely.
All right, I think on that note, where are we?
Yeah, I definitely think that's it. Thank you so much for your insight. I'm going to be looking at all of this stuff so much more now. I mean, opera and VR, I haven't really seen that as much, and I'm glad that this topic was brought in. But thank you again. Can
I add one quick thing? I was just going to add that as people are, I know we have a lot of extremely tech savvy and heavy people watching, and if I would encourage them to reach out to arts organizations and try and find people that maybe even haven't worked with this space before, and kind of let them give a new, fresh perspective, because it is a different way of visualizing things sometimes.
And they're looking for collaborators right now, especially because of the pandemic. So many people want to pivot to XR and don't know how. So if you see a company that you think is interesting, reach out to them, because they're probably looking for you.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
On that note, thank you.
Have a great one.
So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.